Good evening and welcome to TDM Talk Show. I'm your host, Kelsey Wilhelm. Our guest tonight is an Associate Professor of Integrated Resorts Management with the University of Macau and longtime resident of the SAR, having also experienced the outbreak of severe acute respiratory syndrome, or SARS, which the current Wuhan coronavirus is being likened to. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
We had an interesting update after seeing what's been going on in China with the elevated number of cases and deaths in China, as well as the virus appearing in other countries as well. We were just informed yesterday, Wednesday, that we have had a case in Macau and there has been a case in Hong Kong. This obviously has a direct impact on Macau as a whole because we are a tourist destination. How big of an impact could this have?
Well, at the moment, it's a wait and see because we've already had a case, and the priority, of course, is to the treatment of the person and for those around it to be quarantined to a certain level. And I guess it's a wait and see. What we learned was at the time of SARS was it's a crisis in tourism, and a health crisis is quite a major one, and particularly
worldwide.
Yes. So the issues of communication. Being very timely with that communication, being quick, being a simple communication sent out to everybody, that we could get a level of trust in the community and the government, that there's a leader that everybody can identify with. So these are the things that were very important in a tourism crisis. There has to be a level of trust, and that the government, or that the messaging they're giving out, that people understand it, believe it, and can act upon it. So at the moment, there's not really much we can do but see how the virus in medical terms will grow or not grow. We hope it doesn't. But again, we must continually communicate to the people of Macau, communicate to the travellers as well from the point of origin to Macau, and let them know that these are the symptoms. So again, the communication is very important, using many means of communication and to build up that level of trust, and also letting people be more knowledgeable about the virus. Yes.
Now, they did have in yesterday's press conference, they were speaking about masks and also speaking about personal hygiene, trying to redirect a little bit away from masks only needing to use a mask, but also personal hygiene in general, trying to wash your hands frequently, try not to be in close contact with people or animals, things like that. We noticed that both SARS and the current coronavirus originated in China, but there was a marked difference in the way that they were communicated, or the speed in which they were communicated. So SARS had about 4 months, I think, if something like that, before it was communicated, whereas this one, we were told about it last month, and we've had constant updates since then, including human-to-human transmission. How important is knowing something like that straight off the get-go, especially for somebody who either works in hotels, operates hotels, or is visiting hotels?
I mean, from the get-go, there should be transparency from government to the local community. We learnt that from SARS. There was some hesitation, and then by that stage, several people were infected. So the issue about being transparency and timeliness, the speed, if something happens, do communicate it to people, where it be negative. People need to know. People need to gain the trust of the leadership of the government and know, because masks, many people I just see come to the studio are all wearing masks now. So it is, and even walking along the street. So there will be crowds of people in supermarkets. People are going to be anxious, but communicating the message, and of course, as we know more about the virus, letting it know, let people make the judgment, let people know what's happening, what we found out more about it. And I don't think like having periods of no information is a good thing. We need periods of constant communication. We have lots of media channels to get that information out. So no matter what the messaging, whether it be negative, or we should get the messaging out. And we knew, and I mean, maybe preempting, but as a tourism professor, I can say that there's a period of the anxiety, of course we have this period where we're going to be going through, but there's also a period of the post, which was a big issue, of course, for SARS as well. But again, it's not a time to be talking about it now, but as we look towards, Macau is a tourism economy, so we look towards what do we do now, and what should we be doing in the weeks to come and beyond that. So a crisis is just not today. It's going to be a large, planning. And there's a lot of stakeholders involved in a crisis as well. Definitely. And again, you have a big round table of people who, from medical profession to the transportation to immigration to tourism, and they all have a voice, and it's very important to have that collaboration. The collaboration between industry and the public sector too is very important again, because the industry, sure, they will get a lot of do this and do that. We understand the gaming industry, get our instructions, but they have to be clear as well to the industry.
Yes.
You know, they have to be clear about what we want, how we want, and who we want to do it, because that's also very important. And from time to time, I have felt that connection has not been as quick. So I hope this time we can have a lot more working with industry across the breadth of industry, so we get their buy-in as well.
We have a much different scale also. I mean, SARS was 2002, but primarily affected Macau, Hong Kong, and China in 2003, and now here we are in 2020. Ideally, we should have progressed quite a bit, and I think that there are certain measures which that has worked well in. We do have a Center for Disease Control and Contagion.
Yes.
They just set up a new task force to handle this as well, and you see that from the scale of the amount of people we have coming here also, it's much, much vaster than when SARS was happening. I was here at that time, you were here at that time. What do you feel as an individual on the ground? Are you scared of this in any way?
Well, let me just say, after SARS, I says, you know, if we don't learn where there's issues of hygiene and all of these issues we learned from SARS, then there's a period of time, then people forget and you know, and old habits and where are we going. So, I mean, what did we learn? Well, after a period of time, people forget, and then now we're coming back to again, and therefore people are like, so what did we do during SARS? And people are now running around, we're getting a mask on, we're getting hand cleaners and sanitizers, you know, so we're going back into what we did in SARS. So I think it's, what we have to do is, yes, lessons learnt. So going forward, I mean, one of the things I learned at that time was of course, this we talk about the stakeholders and letting people know, but also what do we do? You know, every year remind ourselves.
Yeah.
We should remind ourselves what happened, and rehearse. Maybe we haven't done enough of that over the last years, but maybe it's something we should always think about. Well, if we had a crisis before, that it could happen again, and now it is happening again, and so I hope we'll get through this one fairly quickly.
Well, we'll see. I mean, this is literally evolving day by day. We have new cases. We have the so-called super spreaders. You don't know exactly how many people they've been in contact with. They're trying to quarantine everyone around it, even if they might not be infected. We don't have all the information, unfortunately, because it's simply not possible.
The medical professionals that will give us that technical knowledge, and from that we can make some assessment. But from my areas of tourism, of course, we look at the communication, and it's so important that we assess to make it minimalise into the tourism business, because it is an industry that so many people rely on, and we have to minimise the economic impact, particularly in Macau, because it will spread out to small businesses and such. So we have to be very wary of the impact beyond just, of course, it has the medical impact, but it will have for Macau as a tourism economy, it could have a much more dramatic impact in terms of economics.
And that's interesting, because so often people focus on the gaming industry and the revenues which will be affected by this, or the hospitality industry and what will be the impact of that. But if less people come to Macau, less things are bought, less businesses stay open, less businesses, especially veered towards tourism, are going to be ongoing. And that was a period that we saw within SARS. Also, we had a lot of businesses closed. We saw that ripple-on effect, which took quite a while to come back. Now, we were talking earlier about different types of crises that a city or region can face. And it seems like a medical crisis is one of the most difficult to recover from over a period of time.
Yes, because we have found in tourism crisis that is particularly one that takes a longer time to recover. But the recovery can be longer because we don't have a strategy in place to recover. So the communication is wrong, and we're not getting the messaging out, and we're not working with small businesses and so forth. So part of the problem is the post issue of like, how are we ready to get back to business as quickly as possible, and we should have a strategy in place. And so, yes, but the issue with health, and particularly human to human, that does impact the psychology of people a lot more, and therefore the issue of trust, and it takes a longer time and a period of time for people to get more confident in perceptions of a city that may or may not had the health crisis. So it does take a longer, and for tourism agencies and destination marketing agencies, it's for them to work on this messaging as quickly as possible.
Would you say that hotels are also one of the main stakeholders? It seems like the people who will immediately be impacted by this are going to be hospitality, tourism agents in particular, and airliners.
The whole industry, retail industry will be affected.
True.
The small mom and pop restaurants, the souvenir sellers. So it's the breadth of the whole industry. In fact, for me, small businesses are the ones that are hard to sustain because they don't have the economic background of maybe the larger entities like such the gaming industry and such. So for me, my attention would be to the smaller industries that rely on the month to month to pay rents and so forth. So my attention would be more to them. Of course, the whole industry is an economic system, but particularly the smaller enterprises.
Well, and they also don't have the capacity to market and rebrand Macau on such a scale as, say, the government entities or the major stakeholders such as the 6 concessionaires of the casino licenses.
That's right, that's right.
So it makes it an even more daunting task to move forward.
Yes.
And at the helm of this, we just recently went through a change in leadership within Macau. The 20th, it's been a little bit over a month since we've had the new 5th-term government in place led by Chief Executive Ho Yat-seng. But one of the new people who came in at a very difficult time, actually, is someone that we don't know that much about, who is now part of this whole leadership of the response to what could become an epidemic, and we'll cross our fingers will not, which is Secretary for Social Affairs and Culture, El Xiaoyong. She has led a number of press conferences so far. She's talked to the public so far, and we do have information coming out. If there was any area that would be particularly important to communicate, let's say the number of infections or control measures or which stakeholders to talk with first, is there any roadmap general for how that should be played out?
No, there's just a few personal things in a crisis. I mean, we can talk about strategy all day, about crisis strategy, but to be visually seen in leadership during a crisis, it's not for me to tell governments how to look, but my study and understanding of crisis and is to be visually seen throughout, and to be approachable, and to be communicating, and to be there with the community. And so by not being there, that's probably not the best approach. So I think these times is not just the press conference is the issue, because that's for media, but there's a lot, there's a constant being there and visually aware, but being visually present, that people see you. And that's very important, because that's a very human thing.
Oh, definitely.
So that's very important particularly at leadership.
And she has been so far, from what we've seen at the press conferences so far. The Health Bureau has been communicating quite a bit. We have had communication from the DICJ. From my own personal point of view, it would be nicer to see more English communication. From just one of the simple examples of the post that they said that they put up on their website regarding the temperature screening at the casinos. I had multiple questions there because it was published in Chinese and Portuguese, which are official languages of Macau. However, the DICJ website does have an English language component, which it updates almost more regularly than the other 2 languages, or as quickly. So I found it strange that that was not a part of that. I found also the same thing with the health services, with the Health Bureau. I think that there could be an improvement.
Coming back from communication also has to be in languages of the people that need to be communicated to. So yes, primarily in Chinese is one of the languages, but Macau says it portrays international city. So we must then understand that our communication is not just to a few audiences, it's to multiple visitation and stakeholders, and the people have to operationalize the rules, which may also need English as well. So,
I mean, we have almost half of Macau's population is non-resident workers.
So maybe it's an issue I'm not aware of, but maybe an issue that communication means it has to be understandable by those who have to operationalize and use it and understand it.
Well, moving on to the changes, obviously this is an ongoing worldwide event, so it's hard to keep the finger on the pulse and see exactly what will happen in between today and tomorrow. But within the changes in Macau, we've had a month to go through what has been happening so far. One of the new secretaries was El Xiaoyong, like I just mentioned, and then we had another key component which influences also the same area, hospitality, gaming, which is the incoming, already came in, Secretary for Economy and Finance, Ho Weng-on, who replaced Lionel Leung. That's also a challenge in regards to dealing with a crisis like this, and also facing multiple items that they have on the agenda for the coming term of the government. such as the casino license retendering.
Yes.
Have there been, before everything was disturbed by an international epidemic, have there been any new indications that you've seen from the integrated resort side as to whether they have more information towards what's happening?
I mean, it's an area that I cover. I look at many issues on public policy, on tourism policy. I mean, tourism taxation I've been very vocal about and understanding.
Yes.
I've also been writing and reading on understanding retendering of the casino concessions. I've been offering opinion on that as well, where scenario A, B, and C. We should be looking at this window of opportunity when it comes to retendering for Macau, to a time to reset some of the things in 20 years that we have not been able to accomplish. One of the issues is diversification of the economy. We won't be Las Vegas with that 65 non-gaming, 35 gaming split on revenues, but certainly I think it's the time that we can reflect. Places like Singapore looked at looked at Macau, and when they introduced integrated resorts, one of the things was about tourism development was 40% of the tendering, that the tourism of Singapore would continue to be a diversified economy, the convention industry and so forth. And they had very good KPIs to monitor and move it forward. Macau, we don't have a lot of what we call KPIs or did you achieve, how did you achieve, and month to month to month. So maybe we will see a lot more of more of oversight and saying how are we doing each month. But also I like to say working hand in hand between public and private sector to achieve the goals. So I think I've given many opinions but I really think it's a time to reset some of the issues and look at them. It's a window of opportunity, and I hope we don't miss it, because I think 20 years I've been looking at some things we haven't been able to. We've had barriers and challenges, but certainly retendering. Let's just look at some of the contractual terms and conditions that we can navigate the industry and say this is where we want to go. So I think it's a very important contract that we give out, because it'll give a lot more direction. But again, giving vague terms and not giving specific terms, and also should we have more people in the system now, not just 6, and so forth. I think it's a good dynamic to discuss. There's no good or bad scenario, because Macau will have to reinvent what it wants to be and how it wants to be, and where it wants to be in 10 or 20 years. So people say this is the perfect scenario. Macau will have its own scenario, but what it gives this time around will truly make sure where it'll be the next 10 or 20 years. So I hope there's a lot of, when we look at the retendering, there's lots of this food for thought within the terms and conditions.
Each one of the current 6 concessionaires does serve slightly different markets or market blends, depending on the property also. And we've seen that Macau has undergone such quick evolution and seen such quick growth in the amount of tourists that are coming in, that the locals are not content with the amount of people that are here, based upon the currently available infrastructure, housing, and other limitations which are there in place. And there was a study that was done on that also, and you commented on the study and produced your own paper as well before the study came out, if I'm not correct.
That's right.
I'm not incorrect. Are you in favor or not in favor of a tourism tax?
I'm in favor of a policy that addresses the problem. A tourism tax is a policy that many other destinations around the world use for many reasons, right? To limit the numbers of mass tourists. It also uses it to pay for some level of infrastructure that the tourist has to use, where it be, for example, in Japan they have a tourist tax, but it pays for the terminals that the tourist has to use. It pays for tourist information centres. It pays for new signage. So I believe if it facilitates the tourist, then they pay for that. So I believe the tourist tax has a place. I just don't believe for Macau, right, that the tourist tax, what it's proposing, it has lots of gaps in the policy. Or it's not a policy, it was just a tactic, because the policy would have lots of things in it, like how do we collect it, and how do we use the money, and how do we help SMEs and so forth. That's the policy. This was a tactical, should we tax or not tax the tourists? And the question was, do we tax or not tax the tourists? So that's why I was saying, well, there's a bigger tourism system in place in Macau. There's urban planning, master planning. There's issues about rising rising rents, and so forth.
Lack of land,
That's the tourism system, and they are part of the whole questions about how do we manage mass tourists. The branding of Macau, city branding, which I have said for many years, is a way forward for Macau in positioning Macau towards attracting a certain type of tourist, and therefore disincentivizing another tourist who may go somewhere else because they feel that this is not the city for me because the price point is too high or such. Many cities around the world are able to differentiate themselves on a position. Macau has never been clear on its branding over the years. It's been what the government do and then what the integrated resorts do. So I believe, for example, there's a way to go, but that doesn't happen overnight. And certainly in the last 2 decades in which I've been saying this is an area we do need more attention, and that's the direction we should be taking. And therefore, that will then they'll probably move the 1.2, 1.3 average room stay. It'll also get people to stay longer and spend more. So there's many more, when we talk about policy, there's a lot more considerations than a tactic.
So, I mean, looking at it just from a very, very basic point of view, if you slap in a 100 pataka tourist tax on an individual tourist, theoretically, it would seem like that would limit the amount of low-spending tourists that come to Macau. But how would that impact, let's say, a family group that would choose to come to Macau?
First of all, I don't think the casinos, for example, $100, if it's a premium mass or VIPs, they probably just cover the cost. And to me, it's like a paper cut. It's an irritation when you get a tax. But I also believe it really may impact the SMEs and SMEs of Macau. Because a person with $100 less in their wallet may still come to Macau, but that $100 would have buying to a local noodle shop or a local souvenir shop. So it would actually have a negative impact on small businesses, and hence why I think it hasn't been thought through the economic impact beyond, well, we believe by adding $100, this certain amount of tourists won't come here. I think, yes, some tourists will come here, but actually one area it will impact is small businesses. So the thought process has to be thought a lot more.
I find that really interesting because it almost seems like the diversification plan and the tourism tax could be almost simultaneously in opposition, while at the same time the government has established support plans, fiscal support plans for SMEs, so to provide them funding because they want to diversify the economy. So while the government is providing money to these SMEs, they're simultaneously thinking of policy which could limit their actual clientele. It's an interesting
strategy is about
dynamic.
tying all tactics together with a common like 10-year goal, 15-year goal. So this is what I'm talking about, where we can't have very fragmentation about approaches. This is what strategy has to be. Tourism strategy and urban strategy has to tie everything together with a common goal and output, and then you wouldn't have this level of fragmentation, or in some cases you may see actually contradiction.
It'll be interesting because we do have a new 5-term government. The chief executive is going to be announcing his policy address soon. We'll end up with a new 5-year tourism policy plan, I will assume, and some other key points that will bring together, let's say, the secretaries that stayed on, such as the Secretary for Transport and Public Works, Raimundo do Rosário, who will be instrumental in trying to drive infrastructure forward. And we have a new Secretary for Administration and Justice, though, who came from the CCAC, so it'll be interesting to see how that has played out in terms of policy and legality. But we have another problem within Macau, which is affecting both locals and visitors to Macau, which is the housing and infrastructure. So we saw the LRT come online, finally. Have you seen that has been contributing? I know that we had talked at some point, and I had talked with Professor Davis Fong, who is also a legislator, about the interconnectivity of the Cotai Strip and how that could be facilitated by something such as transport infrastructure. Does it seem like we're getting closer towards that interconnectivity, and are there any other roadblocks to knock down?
I mean, it's a $1.4 billion project. It's a very expensive project the government has invested in, and operationally day by day it has to keep going. Have I seen any major impact? No. The issue is no, because the issues it only does a small part of Cotai. Are we sending tourists to use the train? I believe we still have a way to go. I see traffic congestion as well. I said this before. People will navigate to the simplest. They will not leave their cars. Will not leave a coach. Will not leave, a bus. if they feel there's a level of still inconvenience. It's human instinct that they won't walk to a train. And we've seen it all over the world. And when I look about connectivity and sky trains, they connect right into integrated resorts. People walk across air-conditioned corridors and so forth. We don't have this either. It's a very, again, public sector work and then private sector, but there's this connectivity. There's no discussion. So I think we still need a lot more work to be done about, the connectivity. People, we haven't seen them around the world with the sky trains. We have air-conditioned corridors feeding from one integrated resort onto a train. This is not, it's like stop, start, stop, start. So we need to have a little bit more collaboration to really have a proper network.
And they're talking about Hengqin kind of being Macau's savior in terms of more land, more MICE facilities, more entertainment facilities. Obviously, part of it is mapped out. I've seen some zoning. JLL put up something the other day which showed quite a large zone dedicated to what would be more leisure and entertainment facilities, and I would assume also some of the MICE and hotels. But we also have the new reclaimed land projects coming on, which will add, I think, 5 square kilometers to Macau's actual landmass. That'll be bringing in a different mixture of commercial and potential space for SMEs. We'll see.
Yes.
We'll see. But all of that seems like it's going to take quite some time. I mean, the border issues with Hengqin are starting to get resolved, but it doesn't seem like the border is going to be dissolved entirely until, say, 2049.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of projects in the pipeline. I mean, when I came to Macau, it was 24 kilometers squared, so I have 6 or 7 kilometers reclaimed, which included the Cotai Strip.
The whole Cotai Strip,
yes. So, I mean, the reclamation of land is not a new concept, and to have, for example, the Cotai Strip was an end result of one of those reclamations. So, yes, but again, it comes down to, I believe it has to be, for example, policy-driven too. I mean, the policies have to be in place to help these projects get off the ground. So yes, I have seen convention centres built where they're not getting filled because you have to have a communication plan in to fill. So you don't want empty buildings, you don't want empty transportation modes. So a plan is only as good as a plan unless you put a strategy behind it to implement it, where you have you have a marketing plan in place, a labour strategy in plan. You bring in labour. We have Macau. We have an issue with labour, having talent.
Continued issue with labour.
So,
I mean, this has been an ongoing.
They're all connected. There's a connection. We have to realise in the last two decades of Macau's not being able to diversify its tourism economy. What is the reason? And therefore, if we do, it doesn't matter what we do in the longer term, and this and this. There is some soft issues like, for example, labour remains unresolved. And so if you build another convention centre and where will you get the talent to man it sufficiently to organise it, to market, to go overseas and go against other cities to bring association meetings to Macau, where the government are going to back you up. And other governments around the world are extremely aggressive for the MICE sector and back up convention organisers. So yes, we can have more land, we can have more entertainment facilities, but again, we need to have we have to look at some of the things that are still unresolved.
What I find really interesting in regards to the Greater Bay Area is that it is providing a lot of interconnectivity, especially in terms of the railways and everything, but each one of the individual cities is doing its utmost to attract talent. And that includes people who are Chinese citizens who are from Macau. So we've literally right across the border, we have the GI Convention Center, we have some of these huge MICE facilities which have already come up. How are we going to retain our labor?
But the issue about the Greater Bay Area, I mean, and I have been involved with a lot of, looking at the Greater Bay Area and understanding the Greater Bay Area. I mean, yes, there's a level of, we work together for the Greater Bay Area, and it becomes an area in itself where visitors come to and trade and commerce and labour. But again, there's a level of competition within the Greater Bay Area, which you just identified, in terms of labour, in terms of tourism, in terms of trade. So we're going to have this inter-competition between cities. What is Macau standing in this? How are we going to compete within the Greater Bay Area too? Sure, as a Greater Bay Area, again, as the destination, very good. We will be very, very a magnet. But within that, there's several cities that will compete. One area you touched upon is talent, and making it more attractive for talent. Each city will have its own policy in place. Each city will develop its own strategic marketing about terms of trade I call it the three T's: trade, talent, and tourism.
Okay.
So, I mean, they'll all have a policy in place to attract more tourists, make them stay longer. So there's going to, Macau should look at, well, how do we make our own position in this, in terms of how can we be uniquely, for example, Hong Kong and Guangzhou and now and the various cities. I mean, and I think we have to seriously think, and coming back to the issue about the retendering too, about the Cotai Strip, what's its role to play. And I think we understand we're an entertainment city, so we think about how do we rise our profile within this. That's our unique selling position. And so how do we, an entertainment city, for example, then with enough talent to bring in, if we want to bring in the convention entertainment world of terms of events and shows and theatres and so forth. This is Macau, the city within the Greater Bay Area. So I think, yes, I think Macau also has to, how do we position ourselves and stay competitive within the Greater Bay Area, as well as, of course, cooperate with our partners.
Well, and now we have to face the headwinds of the ongoing coronavirus, and we'll see how that affects all of the cities within the Greater Bay Area, because that'll have an ongoing effect. Let's hope for the best.
We all do indeed.
We'll keep our fingers crossed. Thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you for having us.
That's all for tonight from TDM Talk Show. Join us again next week for more. Good night.